Thank you. Thank you guys very much. I appreciate you guys coming in on a day after a big holiday here. I wasn't sure how many people would be coming in, but great to see all and some familiar faces here as well, and people at home if you're watching. I'm going to be talking about travel photography, which essentially is photography, but there's a lot of very specific things that happen when we travel, and I've traveled a lot. Maybe not as much as you've traveled, because we talked earlier. We talked about how many countries. I think she beat me by a few. But there are certain things I think that might be able to help you. And at the end of our talk, maybe we can share some things together, because I guess we're a lot of passionate photographers in this room, a lot of people who have been traveling with our photography. So I'm going to talk about the actual travel. I'm going to talk about some technical things, and I'm going to talk about some other ideas that I think might help you in your travels as a photographer. So, without further, let's just get into it. I've been doing this a long time. I started out, that picture is one of the first pictures I'd ever taken, and it was on the roof of my apartment building in my native Montreal. We lived near the Dorval Airport, which was renamed the Pierre-Elliott Trudeau Airport. And I used to photograph sunsets and planes, coming in. And I think as a young guy, I kind of imagined, who are these people? Where do they come from? And I kind of was dreaming about the day when I would get to travel. And really through photography, my dreams have come true, because I followed my camera around the world on amazing adventures. Basically a shy person, but the camera's been my excuse to really get out there and experience life and see things firsthand in that very kind of privileged way that we do as photographers. So to prove it, I'm just going to share a little slideshow of a recent flight that I took. When does it stop? When does the photography start and stop? There's always photo opportunities. So, I was not really I wouldn't normally get a window seat, but I realized that it's kind of a privileged place to be, and why not just shoot out the window? I'd try and clean it off as best I can. At night, I would try and hold my camera, take the thing to try and get the best shots, and just put together a set of picture. That's when the travel begins, and it's something that I'd really like to do, and I'll talk about as we move forward, shooting from moving things, shooting from the local transportation. So I've been doing this a while. This book has been out over 5 years now. I'm out actually this year going to be doing a revised edition. I've learned a lot in the past 5 years, and I'll just add to it. The basic premise will be there. And a lot of what I'm going to be talking about here today is kind of there. It's kind of my process. And we're all photographers. We all do things in different but similar ways. And one of the things that has been a bit of a mantra for me is to challenge myself to come up with kind of a set of pictures. And by that I mean, if I'm traveling to a place, if it's not on assignment, I will give myself the personal challenge of coming up with a hook, some kind of specific theme or story that I'm excited about, that I can spend time at. Because in my experience, the more time I spend on something like that, the better the images get. Because when I spill out the images from the trip, sometimes I've noticed early in my career that I'm kind of taking the same picture over and over again. And by trying to create a story where the sum is greater than the parts, it helps me to sort of peel the onion, go a little deeper, gives me a little bit of bravado to do some things that I wouldn't normally do. And I do them because great pictures are the result. And that has been kind of my goal. As much as the journey is the destination, I've heard Deanne Arbus say that the pictures are the trophies that represent that journey. So, Cartier-Bresson, always an inspiration, says that everything's interesting if you scratch it. And by that, going sort of a little bit below the surface. And I think that this is one of the things that is going to help us make stronger images, especially when we travel. So the idea of an inch wide, a mile deep, depending on your travels, of course. It doesn't necessarily have to be a very sort of in-depth story. But over the years, I've done various stories. I've spent a lot of time traveling in Africa in recent years, working on the HIV/AIDS story. And again, the more you work on it, the stronger it gets. And the more you spend time in certain places on your travels, I think that can really become the anchor for the images that you come back with to really sort of make you happy and kind of satisfied. I've talked about, the Life magazine photographers just because, there was a template that they used to help them make sure that they didn't come back with images that didn't have any images that were missing in terms of telling the story. And the editors kind of had a little bit of a formula. And the signature image is the image that we're always striving to get. It's going to be the 5-star image that hopefully we're going to have a few of them when we come back from our travels. But it's probably going to be a very strong image, one that kind of tells the story of the place that we're photographing. So the signature image could be from anywhere in the shoot. The wide view allows you to kind of tell more of the story as sort of the scene setter to let people know exactly where things were. I'm going to talk about people because as much as I know that there are a lot of photographers out there that travel because they're passionate about landscape, for example, but why not come away with a set of people pictures to help complement the work that you're doing if people is not necessarily your genre? Anybody out there that don't like people that much? You're not crazy about people. Okay. All right. So I understand. And I think sometimes it has to do with a little bit of shyness on our part. And, again, as I mentioned off the top, at my core, I'm a shy person, but I know that when I do use my camera as an excuse to get out and engage with the world, my experiences have been 96.3% positive. And because of that, I've had, just a rich photographic life to the point where, people have become my most passionate and rewarding topic when I travel. And of course, the detail shots, we don't want to overlook the details, but the same attention has to be paid to details as it would, a portrait or any other any other image, because ultimately each picture that we're striving to make is going to be strong, regardless of the content. And what ties it all together is the place that we're going to be visiting and trying to record. And then, of course, the action. So these are things, these are the formulaic labels that were used to make sure that you came away with a set of images that at least told the basic story. And of course, there's many ways to tell our travel stories. But I think, and I've mentioned this before in my talks, but David Bowie, when he passed away, this quote was attributed to him, and I really thought that it applies to us. I mean, we're adventurers when we're traveling because we're going out into the unknown. And if you feel safe in the area you're working in, you're not working in the right area. Always go a little further into the water than you feel you're capable of. Get a little bit out of your depth, and when you don't feel that your feet are quite touching the bottom, you're just about in the right place to do something exciting. You know, it's not, you don't regret the things you do, you regret the things you don't do. So I'm going to encourage you in your travels to get a little bit more out of your comfort zone maybe than you have in the past. This isn't a safety thing. Of course, safety is a given. We have to make sure that we're safe. But I think that we can talk ourselves out of some things when we travel. And, you know, it's a mistake because I think there's a lot of powerful experiences and ultimately images. You know, the experiences are amazing, but you want to have the image. I mean, I don't lose sight of the fact that when I'm traveling, it's the image that really is most important to me. Perhaps because I'm a professional photographer, sometimes on assignment, but I think that there's room in your travels to enjoy the trip, but there's also room to kind of work it to the point where you can really come back with images that even surprise you. They're pushing you, and suddenly you're doing things that are even stronger. So I think that, you know, before I go away, it's important for me to do a little bit of research. I will go to Flickr. Now, of course, Instagram has become so popular that if you search certain hashtags, you can kind of find out what you're in for in terms of where you're going and the kinds of pictures that you think that you're going to make. When I'm booking a trip, often I'm going to find out if there's any kind of festival going on. Like for this in the Bahamas, the Junkaroo Festival happens in December. You know, people that come to New York, only non-New Yorkers would go, you know, to December 31st and not go to the bathroom for 8 hours in the cold to get a shot. But of course, you know, when I was new to New York, that's what I did. But, you know, the reality is when you go to a place, you're going to have this place, which is going to be plenty of inspiration for you as a photographer. But if you can add some delicious chocolate icing of an event or a festival that's happening in this new place, that just allows you to spend a concentrated effort that afternoon, that week, on whatever event that's going on, and you still have the place to go to. So it's not hard through the internet to kind of figure out when might be a better time to travel, and you know, you might decide I'm going to avoid the event because you want kind of the quiet, or you have a different idea in mind. But it's something to consider, because when these things are happening, it allows you to really sort of concentrate your effort to tell kind of a micro story as part of the travel story that you're going to tell from your trip. So probably the most important thing that I would say to you as a traveling passionate photographer is you shouldn't do it on your own. I'm not saying that you should go in a workshop, although I do workshops and they're fun, but it's really important for me to find someone local to help me, especially in a place that I'm new to, in a place where I don't speak the language, or where I'm not maybe as familiar as much as I'm researching it. And in my experience as a professional photographer, I'm able to achieve the kind of imagery that would probably take me months to do on my own in a very short time, in a matter of days, because I can find local help, and it's usually a local photographer. It might be a journalist, and it's not really hard. You can go onto Flickr and make contact with people. You can find out about the universities that are going on in the countries that you're visiting, and look if they have a photography program or a journalism program. And chances are, depending on the country, it's extremely affordable, because we're blessed with a very high standard of living here. And in my travels in Africa and other places, India, it's not a big expense to hire someone. They're thrilled, and you suddenly have entree into this incredible landscape that it'd be a lot harder for you to do. Anybody out there, show of hands, already does this when they're traveling a little bit? It's something that I really think that you should do because even if it's for just a couple of days of your trip that you concentrate on, it's going to make a huge difference in what you're going to come away with. So we'll talk about that. Sometimes, in booking the hotel, now it's expensive to book a hotel that has a view, but again, doing your research, now this isn't a hotel, but if you have a nice hotel that's got a great view, it allows you some opportunities. You can set the tripod up on the balcony, you can do a time lapse, which is kind of hypnotic. I don't do it very often, but when I have a hotel room where there's something going on outside, I might choose to do that. And it just gives you a little bit of added stuff that you could use, in your story that you're telling when you're traveling. I think it's important to kind of have a scene-setting kind of image. And again, it's following kind of the old formula of life, but you start out with sort of the vista and then you go in close. You don't have to do it that way, but why not cover yourself? Because when you get back, you don't want to be missing some things that you kind of regret. You want to do as much as you can to tell the story the way you want to tell it, and give a sense of place. And so sometimes going to a place that has a view, but of course if you do your research and book a room with a view, that sort of takes care of that, and you don't have to worry about it so much. Now you guys probably do it. I know I do. Signs can be very useful to you as part of telling your story. So when I see signs, it's not just a visual notebook or a scrapbook that I'm taking. I want to try and make, strong images of these signs because, sometimes the sign becomes the image that is part, might even be the signature image. The thing about words in your pictures, I would be wary of in the sense that I see students all the time, sometimes, showing pictures that are a little bit knocking the viewer on the head with, because you're always going to read the words in any kind of picture, and often you don't even need them. The pictures that kind of ask questions that you don't really know exactly what's going on can be the more evocative and intriguing ones, which is fine. You still want to sort of make sure that you capture the signs. Sometimes you can use them as sort of chapter setters in the slideshow or the book that you create or the exhibition that you give later. I've learned to kind of eat carefully, mainly because, often when I travel, I'm on an assignment and, there are no excuses. The weather, it doesn't matter. You have to come back with stuff. Now, as a passionate personal photographer, when I'm on my own shooting, I think the bar is even higher. I mean, there's pressure on assignment, but for you guys, if you're not working for someone, you have to answer to yourself. So, you'll be mad at yourself if you didn't sort of give the kind of effort that is required to get the strong images. And there's not really any shortcuts to it, but as passionate photographers here today, giving up our time, it's something that we want to do because we know that we will be rewarded with stronger images. And of course, also photographing what you eat, because sometimes, in different cultures, the food is a big part of what it is that you're photographing. Some of these are, I didn't have to go very far to find some of these images. But food is something that, is something, you guys photograph food? You don't like people, but you like food? Yeah, okay, good. So I think that sometimes you never really know. Sometimes the food shot becomes the signature picture, unbeknownst to you. Don't think too much, just shoot. And that's the beauty of photography. It's kind of a therapy. We don't have to think. Of course we have to think to a certain degree, but as we create, as we sort of capture the world around us, depending on the kind of photography that we're doing, often a lot of it is kind of unconscious with direction, and the less thinking sometimes and the more acting means that you're going to come away with stronger images. So in the book, and I think this is sort of a key point, so I put it up here at the beginning, I think that concentration is really important, particularly when we travel. And it's interesting to me that, from my experience, exciting surroundings don't always translate into great pictures. Have you ever been to an incredible place and you shot it, you came back less than happy with your pictures? That's never happened to me, but it happens to me a lot. But I try and understand why that happens, and I think I have a bit of an answer to it. You have to be concentrating, and there is a way to kind of learn to concentrate, to be in the moment, so that everything else fades away so that you can concentrate on what you're doing. You have to be on your own. You can't be with your spouse. You can't be with anybody else, because in my experience, again, to really do my best work, I can't. It's hard enough to get into that concentrating zone to really be able to shoot. And even with a spouse that's very supportive, just knowing that they're there, you need to have that alone time. So along with scheduling someone who can take you into these places, you need to, if you're traveling with any other people, you need to split up. You need to sort of take that time to yourself. If you're with other photographers, better to be away. Photo walks are fun, but they're not a time to make great images. They're a time to sort of pick brains and find out what people are doing. But to do your best work, you have to find a way to concentrate. So the reason why I think, and I use this picture as an example as to why it is that we are disappointed when we come to this incredible place and we come back and the images are not there is, and I've experienced it, and I think you have too, is you're a little bit overwhelmed. So you're in this new place, and we know that photography is a powerful way to capture the literal world that's in front of us. So when you're in this incredible environment and you start to shoot, you're kind of just recording the literal that's in front of you. But to make the kind of images that satisfy you, that you can make, that are stronger, you have to kind of take a deep breath, get out of your comfort zone, and figure out a way to focus in on something that's going to yield strong photographs. And in my experience, it's best in this kind of situation to kind of wander around the whole scene. And I have a slide in here that talks about warming up, because, photography is it's a physical thing, and athletes and musicians warm up before they go out. Photography is a technical thing. It's a creative thing. I mean, there's so much going on in photography that warming up can be useful, because if you wait to actually take that picture when you finally get there and the planets align and 5 stars, you're a little bit stiff. So I like to sort of wander the place and just take a few frames to remember what it's like to take a picture, so that when you do get there, you're kind of ready. It's digital, you can always delete things. So in my experience, I will kind of, especially if it's not all that big, like this area here in Rwanda, I will kind of wander the whole thing. And often where I start is the place that has the most visual potential. And often it's the light that attracts me, because that as photographers, if you can find great light and a scene under it, that's 2 of the 5 stars right there. So why not, if the light is there, let the light sort of guide you to where you're going to start. But I'm going to be sort of inspired. I'm going to look for potential. Maybe there's a basket weaver in the corner where the light is good. And in my experience, by spending more time, and not a lot of time, but investing 7 minutes, which seems like a long time when you're sort of traveling and walking and looking, by spending more time, you're going to start to relax a little bit. You're going to start to see things that you didn't quite see because you're a little overwhelmed in this foreign environment. The people around you are going to notice you, and they're going to start to feel more comfortable. And then suddenly things are open, and suddenly those strong images reveal themselves. And you're not just going to show up very often and get that 5-star image. So that's what I would do. I start in the one place, and then I go to the place that's almost as nice, my second choice. And in my experience, it's a much stronger way to work in that kind of situation. Sam Abel, the great photographer who was just here at the Optic Conference, this quote from him: "To me, setting is often the first subject of a photograph. I was taught to see settings by my father. I never saw him force the photograph. I watched him size up situation, then wait. I went to work waiting." So again, I'm not a patient person, but I do know that patience pays off in photography. And fortunately for me, as a non-patient person, Patience means minutes, not days or hours, although it can be depending on the project or the subject that you're choosing. But in my experience, if I find something that's got potential, I'd rather spend more time there and work it a little bit and then have a bit of a difficult time choosing. And I've also learned that, all subjects aren't created equal. So the idea of recognizing visual potential is really important. And on your journey, I'm sure you do it already, but I mean, this is something that when you spend more time in places, which isn't to say making extraordinary out of ordinary. I mean, that's an amazing thing, because when we talk travel, generally we're talking going to extraordinary. So when you go to extraordinary, if you're kind of off the charts in terms of the potential images that you can make. If you can find a way to shoot in a place that you're familiar with and maybe a little less than inspired. How many people don't shoot kind of at home, but kind of do most of their shooting when they're traveling? Yeah, and that's a common thing. But we're photographers, so if you can find something that inspires you close to home, if you're going to spend a lot of time at home, that's a great exercise. And that's just going to really sharpen up everything. So again, like in this instance, I was attracted in Jaipur by the background. So as Sam Abel told me, I kind of went to work waiting. And I just sort of photographed as people were going by. And, I may have given, I kind of pre-focused. I may have given myself a little more depth of field. I've learned that sometimes as people are going by, I won't necessarily hold the camera there because people are polite. Deborah said I'm from Canada, I'm polite, but you're there and people wait for you to take the picture before they walk, even though they're why you're wanting to take the picture. So so you learn to kind of figure that out. And again, in my experience, by spending more time in fewer places, it's going to yield stronger results. So again, learn to recognize visual potential. How many people feel that that's something they could be better at? A little bit? Yeah, okay, because it's really important. And actually, one exercise might be to look back at some of the images that you really like, that you've got on your travels, and sort of, see what it was that allowed you to sort of capture that. Obviously, it's a unique place, but there's also some commonality. Maybe it was the light, maybe it was the time of day, maybe it's the kind of place it was. You love going to markets, you love going to abandoned places. Whatever it might be, there could be some clues there. So this was a market in Dubai. I was sort of attracted by the geographic light and shadow patterns that were created. So I spent a little time shooting, waiting for different things and different people to go by. But ultimately, this was the best picture in the time that I had there. And here's another really important thing that I want to impart to you, and that is, in my photographic life, every day I go out trying to capture something incredible. But the reality is, incredible doesn't happen in front of me very often. Of course, we can seek it out by going to places where we think it might be. But if you're in a situation that is a little above average, and I would say this picture was this was in Poland, this little girl carrying this painting. And I remember it distinctly because I did something that I think was a mistake. And that was, I was following her for a little bit, shooting as she's walking, and then her and maybe that's her brother, they turned the corner, and then I stopped and I went the other way. But in retrospect, I don't remember what happened after I stopped because I didn't have to stop. I was not in a hurry, I was not going anywhere. And it was an important reminder for me that when you're in a situation that's kind of good, you don't give up on it until it goes away, the light goes down, you have to leave. Because, in a photographic year, when you look through your images that you've made in that year, how many of those really kind of magical situations have there been? I hope there have been many. But, as a former kind of photojournalist who worked all the time, and, the contest entering would be a good indication. We look at our best stuff, and as much as you try and make the best image out of every assignment that you get, the magic, didn't yield itself very often. So if you're in a situation that you just intuition, because intuition is very powerful for us as photographers. We don't know what's going to happen. And basically, we're there to be there in position with the right lens, aperture position, the right light, the right, all those things have to come together for that 5-star image to happen. And in essence, we're kind of predicting the future. We're recognizing potential and hoping that it will be there. So don't give up on things. Don't give up on them. I think one way to consider making strong imagery when you're traveling is to give yourself certain key words that represent how you feel about a place. So when you get to a place, mark down 5 words in terms of your first impressions. I'm in wherever. It's electric, it's sensual, it's this. And if you have certain key words that you can take with you on the streets shooting, that gives you a very high bar to seek out, because the idea of, electric, if that's your word, in Rio de Janeiro or Vegas, the image kind of has to match that key word. So that gives you kind of a high bar. And of course, if you've already figured out a theme or idea, that will also help you to focus your energy, because when you know what you're looking for, it's much easier to find it. Which isn't to say that serendipity is an amazing thing. We want to just follow that as well. But it can be very sort of helpful to keep that in mind. Maybe it's about the light. Maybe just spend the whole afternoon just looking for light, or whatever it might be. Now, I talk a lot about going through a volume of work, and I think in travel photography, we do have to shoot a little bit more. I think we should shoot a little bit more. We're not coming back there every week. So we want to sort of make the most of the situation, which means working it a little bit harder. If you've seen me before, I talk about going through this volume of work and how to go through it, which I'll talk about in a second. And the more you kind of work the situation, the more you learn after assessing and editing the work that you've just photographed, and you looked and saw what you got, then you go back out again. And this process ultimately gets infused into your working process, if you will. And ultimately, you're going to fast track to stronger images. You're just going to get better at it. And the more you can sort of focus that energy on a specific, the better it is. So, like these, this was in France, this fire guy. I mean, it's hard to say, the difference between these two pictures is not all that great. And ultimately, and I'm not going to talk about editing, but you're going to need help editing. You're too close to the images, especially on your trip, and you were there, you smelt the stew or worse, and that emotional metadata attaches to the image whenever you look at it. Yet, if I look at it, I wasn't there. If the image is not communicating that, then it's not communicating that. And you need to hear that from an objective, respected person. You want to have a hard time editing. Editing shouldn't be easy. And the other thing I would encourage you in terms of getting out of your comfort zone is the idea of photographing different. And as you do the volume, because you have a process, you know how you shoot, and it works. You're getting great images. But unless you try something different, what you're going to come back with is similar to kind of what you always get, which may not be anything wrong with that. But in terms of stretching yourself as a visual artist, the more you can sort of come in really close. Can I come in closer? Are you going to come in really close and see what things look like close, out of your comfort zone a little bit, shoot it, come back, assess. Often, by trying things different, you're going to get something that's different, and sometimes it's good, and you're going to add that to your repertoire. Sometimes it's a timing thing. Your timing is always this. Well, what if you just did it before your natural instinct to decisive moment? Try that. See what happens. Gary Winogrand said, "I photograph to see what things look like photographed," and it's true. As a teacher, as a workshop leader, one of the great things for me is I'm learning all the time from all the students, and I don't have to pay to get into the workshop, which is great. And because I'm seeing things in new ways that I wouldn't have thought of, but I go, that's smart, or I never would have thought to even photograph that. So, try and photograph something, maybe make a note in your travels to photograph something you wouldn't normally photograph, just to see what it looks like photographed, because that will stretch you, and it may be something you'll want to take in and use, in the future. So the idea of going through the volume, I talk about working it because I think it's really important. Because we know that, and I asked for a prop camera, I don't have a camera with me, it's a game of inches. You move slightly, it's going to move everything within the frame, and you're responsible for the whole frame. So we'll talk about that a little bit. So moving around, doing the dance, I think is important. Moving in closer, and I think we're a little bit shy to move in close, but sometimes you move in close, he reacts, I react, kind of created the image, but it's a real authentic moment. And that's the key from our travels. We want to capture, I think, authenticity. We want to capture moments. They're not easy to do. And in order to do that, again, you have to sort of find the visual potential and invest the time. And if you do that, you're going to come away with moments that can only be captured at that time, can never be captured again. And that's the beauty of doing that kind of travel photography. I talk about the idea of bending, which I'm not really a fan of, but I know that in photography, that when I bend down and photograph from a low angle, I can raise her above the horizon line, and I know it's a stronger composition because of it. It's a little less distracting, it's a little more dynamic. So often, again, learning that through my volume of work, I will start off down and then try and get up and continue to shoot. And the other thing too is, again, getting out of your comfort zone, you have to, and again, part of it is the volume and learning and assessing and realizing that even as a shy person, when I get out of my comfort zone and I move in really close, it works. So I do it. I'm not afraid because nothing happens. It's all good. You just get strong pictures. So I'll move to where I look up, looking up, trying to find an interesting angle, like these images in Lisbon, or looking down, waiting for people to come. The more you shoot, the luckier you get. That's all it is. Or getting close. Getting close. It can be very powerful because you're representing the viewer of your photographs. And that gives you some bravado to get in there and really, if you think about this, I have high hopes for my travel images. Maybe I want to do an exhibition. Maybe I want to do a book. Maybe I want to do a talk here in B&H that's live streamed to like tens of people, or hundreds, thousands, millions of people. And because of that, you want to do the best job that you can. So that allows you to get in really close. If getting in close is going to be a strong way to go.
Just remember to take a picture when you fall over as you're getting up.
Yes, of course. I always do. I have many frames like that. So I'm going to show you a little slideshow. I go to Havana a lot. We do workshops there. It's a favorite place to photograph. I know you asked me one of my favorite places. I think it would probably be there, mainly because the people are so open to the visitors and being photographed. I've seen it change a little bit in terms of the reality of having so many tourists, and you're starting to see more people kind of ask for money and so on. But it's still a beautiful, amazing place to go. And I'll just show you a few images from there. So the idea of people photography, I know that it means for a lot of us, it's not always easy to approach strangers. But in my experience, especially when traveling, again, if you have someone that's there with you that speaks the language, that's going to help communicate for you. But regardless of the kind of imagery that you passionately take from your travels, having a set of portraits of people can be a really nice addition to the story that you're telling in your photography, if it's the beautiful landscape that you're photographing. And you can sort of find out a way to kind of capture the people that you yourself are attracted to. And again, I don't think I really said it before, but it's really important that you react to your own sort of personal instincts, because that's what's going to separate you from everybody else, in the room photographically. We all go out there, follow your own curiosity, tell the story that's selfish that you want to tell, and that means the pictures are going to be stronger because you're going to be excited about it. You're going to create images that only you are going to create, rather than try and capture something that you think is a travel photograph. So when it comes to people, I've often said that, of course a smile is a beautiful thing. You definitely want to try and capture it whenever there's a smile, whether it's a little smile or a big smile. But in my experience, often the most evocative portrait is not a smile. So in my short time that I spent with strangers that I find, for whatever reason, I would love to photograph, and I pick the scariest, strangest, whatever is attracting me, those are the people that I'm going to go up to and try and ask. And in my experience, they're going to say yes more than they're going to say no. And as much as people don't know what to do, they often, instinct is to smile at the camera. I won't go up and ask someone, can I take your picture? Because that's too much of a yes-no answer. I will try and engage them a little bit, have a camera around my neck. It looks like I'm a photographer. And I will explain that I'm doing this series. I'm traveling here. I want to show people what it's like and the people that I'm meeting and so on. Do you have time for, because I don't want to just take one picture. I want to sort of work it a little bit. And often, if that first image is a smile, that's fine. But the more I talk to the person, I will try and do something serious, because I find that the Mona Lisa factor, when you can't really tell exactly what's being communicated by the person, that makes for a more evocative image. And all it takes sometimes is for someone to just stop smiling, and suddenly you've got an image that is much more powerful. So many times I will try and do that serious image, but sometimes it's the smiling picture that is the most...
Where did you come upon this?
Well, I was working on a project in Africa. It was actually a book I did on HIV/AIDS Africa, and her name was Bean Jempa. And again, I'm with someone, so everybody knows exactly why I'm there, and do you want to participate in this project that I'm doing?
She was lying down.
We visited her house, yes, and because she was very weak, she was lying down. So that was the situation. And we got a very nice image of her smiling. But in terms of what the story was being told, this picture was a stronger one, in context with the other images. And even in a very short time that we have with people, we have the power to get something that we're not out to make something unflattering necessarily, but at the same time, as a passionate photographer, we were captured by this person that we'd like to photograph, and whatever it is, that's what you want to try and convey. And sometimes it's the sort of seriousness, but in my experience, like this example, this guy, he's reacting because I'm taking too much time. So, often when I've got a stranger that's willing to pose with me or work with me a little bit, okay, let's do this. Oh, the light over there, can we move over? And basically he's saying, I gotta go. And boom, the picture's more interesting. So in my experience with even these very short, and they could be 30 seconds, they could be 8 minutes, they could be 2 minutes, what you're really hoping for is something, what's the word I'm looking for? Something spontaneous to happen. And that you can capture, and when you have a sort of pose situation with a stranger and then something spontaneous happens, sometimes it's something like this. Sometimes, this guy, we met at Madison Square Park. very dignified guy, but the reality was, he wasn't always looking like that. He was a little bit off sometimes, and he was talking and yelling. But I saw this, and this is what I wanted to capture. I could have captured that other side of him, and actually did, but this is what I wanted to choose. So you have the power as a photographer to sort of manipulate the situation, and it doesn't matter the reality. So the more you talk to someone, what was your proudest moment? What was your secret dream? When you're in the field, in your travels, through the interpreter, sometimes something spontaneous happens. Sometimes something happens to the eyes, and you have a very powerful picture. 3 times out of 31 times. But we're in it for the long haul. We're going to do it hundreds of times, which means that we're going to have tens of really strong pictures in the exhibition that you ultimately give. So a worker bee image, again, for that HIV project, and then someone says something, and it's the same room, the same situation, but a much stronger image, because even though it's an AIDS clinic, it's life. And I think that's the other thing you already know, and that is when you travel, you have certain preconceived ideas about the place that you're going to, and often they are completely different from what you expect. As much as you research, you have to experience. And the deeper you go into the experience, the stronger your images are going to be. The deeper and more concentrated your efforts, at least part of your trip, spending it in one place, the stronger your images are going to be, and the more powerful your experience is going to be. So the reality is, when I'm photographing, it's an old photograph from a project I did when I traveled the states that bordered Canada, and this woman was sitting on her porch. So she sees me, she's not expecting to be photographed. Strangers don't quite understand why you as a stranger would want to photograph them, often, in my experience. And there's some suspicion, maybe rightly so. But in the end, after that little elevator pitch that I've developed over the years meeting strangers, people are ultimately very flattered, that someone wants to include them in this street photography project or this travel log that they're doing. And, once you have permission, she knew I was there, I said, just ignore me. And I would, then you can free yourself up. Once the person says it's okay, you can just relax. And at first they're uncomfortable and they're looking at you and so on. But here's the thing, and maybe you've already experienced it. In my travels, it doesn't take long for them to kind of forget about you. So for example, with this image in this little coffee shop in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, I walked in, there's 3 people plus 1 other person there. Oh, I'm a photographer, I'm traveling, hey, do you guys mind if I just ignore me? Yeah, I've got permission. So at first everyone's laughing and so on, but maybe after 3 minutes and 28 seconds, you wear off and you can capture an authentic moment. And when it's an authentic moment, right? When people are acting for the camera or when it's real, and you have to be honest about that in terms of choosing your images. Yeah.
Mr. Simon, actually, for a second, it looks like a middle finger, so I was not sure if it's a cigarette or a middle finger.
Okay, the question from the audience was, that cigarette looks like a middle finger. But no, it is a cigarette, which is more dangerous than a middle finger or not. I don't know. It depends on the situation. But again, it's getting out of your comfort zone, because it's not easy to walk into a little place or to go into a bar or so on. And in my experience, it just sometimes feels that either it's going to end up in hugs or a fist fight, but it's mostly hugs. I mean, you're doing this for the right reasons. You have a genuine interest in exploring and seeing and learning and taking back these images. So the other thing too is, and the great Alfred Eisenstaedt, who lived, I think he was 100 years old, and by the way, photographers live in old age because we have a lot of pictures to take. I don't know if you guys were at Optic, but Art Wolf was saying that if you're doing a book project, you won't die. So we should all have many book projects on the go, because we can't go anywhere until we finish them. So the idea of sort of looking for the background. And this gives you an idea of how I'm working. So when I'm in Morocco and I meet this fisherman, so I'm there, and let's say you're the fisherman a much more beautiful version. But you're the fisherman. So basically what I'm doing is I'm sort of composing the image. We've agreed and so on, so don't smile, whatever. So I'm not really engaging with you yet. I'm sort of trying to find the composition. So it looks like, as far as the fisherman's concerned, that I'm starting to take the picture. But really, I'm just trying to line up the background. And once I've got something, and often I'll use selective focus, which is a wide aperture, to kind of blur it out a little bit, to focus the attention on the person. Once I'm there, then I can engage with you. Okay, look at the camera. Be serious. And sometimes people smile because they're a little nervous. You have to get that smile off them. You have to say, I don't know if you know this, but you're smiling a little bit. Let's try and be serious. And the more you ask them to be serious, the more they're going to break out laughing. But whatever. Sometimes that's a good thing. But does that make sense? Because I think sometimes in our images, when I see especially student work come back, they're so excited about this that they've sort of forgotten about that, which is the background. So you have to kind of have that, again, take a deep breath. Don't worry, if they go, they go, and you'll find the next victim, coming in. But you want to be able to sort of, and sometimes it's just not working. Do you mind, can we just move over here and so on? And, sometimes it's not going to work. But don't end that session until, either it's really over, but don't feel that you're intruding, you're taking too much time, because the people will say when they got to go, they'll go. But in my experience, the longer the session, often the better the images become, because people start to relax a little bit, and you can get sort of more intimate images. Now, the other thing when traveling, again, there's that sort of ethical idea. Is it okay to take this picture, for example? We talk about traveling, we talk about, in our own city, we see homeless people, and everyone has an idea about that. And, my personal idea, again, coming from a journalistic background, is that if you want to make strong, empathetic images of people, you really have to connect with them. Now, obviously here, this guy, he's just sleeping. So I took the liberty to take his picture. Normally, I probably, if he was up, I would engage with him first. And I would sort of, talk to the person, find out a little bit about them, and see kind of where it goes. Now, if you have the idea that you want to do a series on homeless people, for example, that means you've got to get out of your comfort zone. You have to engage. You can't be a sniper with a long lens, because the images will communicate that. There's an intimacy and an intimacy, being physically close to the surroundings. That's hard to articulate, but you know it when you see it. And when you travel, it's great to have a telephoto lens for sure, but again, get out of your comfort zone and see if you can get where you need to get with that 35 versus the 85. And give yourself that, go out with that one lens. The idea of money, when I was in Egypt, it was pre-revolution, if you go to the pyramid, how many people have been to the pyramids before? I mean, they're only there for money, right? Because they're dressed up and that's how they make their living. So, it's understandable. It may feel a little bit weird, but, when it comes to, like in Cuba, the cigar women, that's how they make their money. Street performers, of course. So if I see a street performer and I think it's worth a photo, I will, in the break of the action, maybe just explain I'm a photographer, show them and giving a bigger tip than most people. And do you mind if I I'm just, be there for 20 minutes. Because I want to invest the time, because I know that by investing the time, I'm going to get something better than just a literal record of what's going on there. If people don't want their picture taken, I don't take it. Except for that one, as an example. You got to respect people. There's another picture around every corner, and when you're traveling, you don't need the negative energy, generally speaking. Some places are more difficult to photograph, but that doesn't mean that you can't take that challenge and photograph. I remember being in Morocco. Have people have been to Morocco before? It's a beautiful, picturesque place. But it was a little disappointing to me in the sense that, because I'm this people guy, it was not as easy as I thought it would. I don't know who told me it would be easier, but it wasn't. But it was still possible. Still possible. You just have to work a little harder to connect and maybe spend a little more time. But again, even in these scenarios where you meet a person, this is how it starts, and this is how it ends. Much stronger image. You're not going to get this at the beginning. you have to spend the 8 minutes it requires, which is not a lot of time, to really, get to know people. It's worth it because you're going to shoot a lot of pictures, but how many of them are going to be hung on your digital frame there? Not that many. But there's no shortcut to it, yet you're not really spending all that much time. Okay, another thing that I'm really sort of like to do is take local transportation. This is my cool video slide, because taking local transportation often will end up meaning that you're going to have some strong pictures, to the point where I often shoot from inside, as you saw, planes, trains, automobiles. I like to take these sightseeing tours, those open, because they're a really good challenge. You go to a new place, you get a lay of the land, you're up on the upper deck, and you don't know where it's going to go, but you're going to have an interesting set of pictures, and chances are it's a unique perspective. When I was in Argentina, taxis were really cheap. So I did a whole little series from a taxi. And you may end up with kind of a little micro series that you could use somehow, as part of telling the story that you're in. And you're in a unique place. It sharpens your skill, sharpens your kind of ability to sort of trigger the moment, which is important. So, again, the light. I already mentioned to you, as photographers, I don't know who this guy is, but I love this quote. Hobbyist photographers worry about equipment. Professional photographers worry about money. Master photographers worry about light. And it's true. Now, I think that, you saw a lot of black and white images. I love black and white. We can talk a little bit about that. I think that when we travel, good color photography amplifies the content. But color is difficult because it's a little more light dependent, because color can also really detract from what it is that you're photographing, because black and white cuts to the content. You've got tonal range. Your eye goes to the sharpest part of the picture. It goes to the brightest part of the picture. But in color, certain colors have strong visual weight that can steer the viewer away from what it is you're trying to say. And if you tend to shoot during that golden hour, even in your street travels, it tends to, the warmth of the golden light tends to subdue any distracting color, which helps to amplify the content. So it's a little bit more important. But if you go to where the light is, it means that you're going to have stronger imagery. And of course, the night light. I love the night light because our digital sensors, if you happen to be shooting digital, are amazing in terms of being picking up the night light. My Nikon D5 in high 4 mode goes up to like 3 million ISO. It's not really good at 3 million ISO, but it's the first camera that really lets you get a decent shot of the inside of your lens cap, which is really it's my highest. So I say that in every presentation. Usually gets a little more than that. It's my delivery. Sorry about that. But I mean, we're in this golden age of photography. I mean, it's all out there here at B&H. I mean, chances are whatever you're using is just incredible in terms of what you're able to capture. As a matter of fact, I mean, I wouldn't look at getting new stuff until you've really made sure that you need something new. If you tend to shoot a lot at night and your camera is not necessarily great at high ISO, then yeah, maybe it makes sense to invest in a tool that gives you what you need. Usually investing in a new lens is going to yield, much stronger dividends. But then there's the idea of black and white. Now, black and white, I tend to get lazy. I'm traveling in Cuba, I see everything in color, but Cuba in black and white is also amazing too. And so I think we should think about, in our travels, committing to black and white. One way to do that, sort of, is if you're shooting raw, like with the Nikons, you can select a monochrome picture control, so the color world is revealed in gray tones, on the back, because it's the built-in JPEG you're looking at. You still have that raw color file, which is better to convert to black and white. But this way, you get a sense of what things look like in black and white. And I would sort of challenge you to do something in black and white. How many people, I know you don't like people, how many people like black and white, for example? In the digital realm, there's a lot of hands up here. Black and white's incredible. It really is. You can do incredible things with black and white. The other thing to consider is bad weather, great pictures. So do not despair if the weather forecast is not that great. It just means you're going to get some interesting, strong images. Sure, you can get a little plastic thing to cover a shower cap to cover your camera. I've bought all kinds of expensive things, and I end up with a plastic bag most of the time. But the reality is that some of the best images that you're going to get, you don't even have to get wet to do it. I've learned as an old newspaper photographer where the weather was often the story, that you've got to find a place that's undercover so you can capture the misery around you during your travels, but you're fine. You're not getting wet or anything, and you're going to have strong images. Even shooting from inside a car, I always love doing that because it's kind of serendipitous what you're going to get. It's just fun. These were all from the same kind of a shoot. So don't worry about bad weather. Bad weather means, it's a little uncomfortable. Owen and I were at the Mermaid Parade. That was not comfortable, right? But my hair dried eventually, and it's all good. But weather could be great, and that could be a subject too, and it's part of the story. And sometimes the place that you go to, that's part of the story. So just moving along here, there's a lot of information, but I thought I would talk a little bit about equipment strategies, and we'll leave time at the end for questions. Hopefully it won't go the full 2 hours. Once I get going, I can't stop. You can leave, but I'll continue. So what to bring with you, how to carry it, powering your gear, image editing and storage, just a few sort of questions about this. Those of you that have seen me before know that it really doesn't matter what you're using as long as you understand and you know it well. So it becomes a little bit second nature to you. In terms of the tools that you're using, I think the worst thing you can do, really, is to buy a new piece of equipment and then go on a trip. But I do see it happen. You're going to a workshop, you're all excited. Better to get that equipment a few months before, practice with it. Because again, believe me, I've tried it. In my experience, the best images are with the tool that I'm most comfortable and familiar with, that I'm kind of fastest with. Especially in the realm of sort of street, fast-moving situations. But there's no real downside in my experience as a landscape photographer to be able to sort of figure things out technically very quickly. More time to ponder the creative. And I think that part of the problem is that, photography is a lot of things, as mentioned. And it's a battle between your left and your right brain. Your left brain is dealing with all the technical stuff, depth of field, histogram, focus point, white balance. your right brain's going, shut up, I'm trying to take a picture. And in the end, the camera gets in the way of your images, and it can't get in the way of your images. So this part of the talk is, it's the most important and the least important because, again, in my experience, the technical is the easiest thing to fix. Unfortunately, though, there's no shortcut around it. So if you have any kind of technical issues, you need to know that when you're there, what needs to be in focus needs to be in focus. If you give up too much control to your camera, and you've got it all, the moment's there, the light's there, the angle, the lens, the f-stop, the shutter speed, but the camera focused on the wrong thing, that picture's a near miss. So some things you just can't let the camera do. The cameras are getting better. And even if 89% of the time the camera gets it right, I know that some of the strongest imagery is in that 11%. And we can't sort of leave things to chance. I'd rather try and get it and miss than let the camera do it and miss. So by simplifying the process, I think that's really going to help. So when the tornado's coming at you, there's not a lot of time to think. You need to be able to capture it without thinking. And from a DSLR perspective, and I know that the landscape is changing, how many people here still use flash powder? Okay. How many people use DSLRs? Still? Okay, how about mirrorless cameras? Yeah, okay. How many people don't use DSLRs? I know we have more than one camera. Okay, well, we're still in that transition period, but I think, especially for travelers, it's getting harder and harder to bring equipment. It's getting, we want to be lighter. We don't want to have all this stuff. So if there's no real downside to having a lighter tool, then it sort of makes sense. But I still think that the DSLR is a bit of a sweet spot in terms of speed and flexibility when it comes to the traveling photographer. And these are a few things that I think can really help you. Using back button autofocus, and I know there's a lot of mirrorless people that still use it. I know a couple of Fuji shooters. Anyone using back button autofocus? Okay, used to. Okay, how about a mirrorless back button autofocus? Okay, so it still works.
What is back button autofocus?
Yeah, back button autofocus basically is, and I'll tell you, it's programming it's disengaging autofocus from the shutter button. So you have to purposely press a back button, and sometimes it's dedicated for focus, sometimes it's programmed. And the beauty of back button autofocus is it allows you to deal with, from an autofocus perspective, things that are moving or things that aren't moving. So, short answer, back button autofocus, if I see something that I want to photograph, it's not moving, I focus. I could let go, and that locks the focus, at which point I can carefully recompose without losing that plane of focus, and then take the shot. Or I could just focus, let go to lock and shoot. Or I could focus, forget to let go, doesn't matter, it's still going to be sharp, and shoot. But if something's moving, if I see, what's your name? Zach running toward me, wanting to hug me. So I can focus on him, and I hold the button down, and as he's coming toward me, I aim my target, single point or D-nod, whatever it might be, at his eyes, and as he's running toward me, I hold the button in and shoot while holding sharp, 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 it's tracking. So essentially it allows you to use the tracking feature and the single servo one-shot feature as well without having to make a change. It's just a very fluid and intuitive way to use autofocus. It's powerful for DSLR users and some mirrorless. So you might want to investigate. There's no holy grail in terms of exposure, so I keep it on aperture priority because I could choose my depth of field, or I can choose a selective focus, which is a lack of depth of field. And I could also change my shutter speed if I'm not caring about depth of field just by turning that aperture number. Auto ISO is very powerful. Are you guys using Auto ISO? Auto ISO is powerful because I could be in automatic mode, aperture priority, choosing my aperture, maybe selective focus. But with Auto ISO, I know that the number one reason why often a picture ends up tossed in the trash instead of hung on the wall is the shutter speed was too slow, and as a consequence, you've got some blur. And if that blur isn't helping the picture, as it sometimes does by creating the illusion of movement, it's usually hurting the picture. So I can set up Auto ISO to give me a minimum shutter speed of, let's say, 5/100th of a second, which will neutralize any coffee drinking camera shake and can also neutralize a lot of subject movement. So I'm controlling my depth of field, I've got my shutter speed, and it just kicks in when I need it. I'm traveling, I'm in the middle of wherever, I see something amazing. I don't have time other than to focus and shoot. And auto ISO has my back at whatever aperture I'm at f4. In order to give me that 500th, the ISO floats up to 800 or 1200. And this isn't our grandparents' ISO. 3200's the new 640. I mean, it's amazing what we can do. I leave it on continuous release so that when things heat up, I can hold the button in and take a burst of frames. I turn off image review from popping up on the back of the camera and distracting me or seducing me into looking and wasting the battery. I could easily just review by hitting the button and check the histogram and so on. And live view when I'm on a tripod. So, the reality is things haven't changed. It's still really about shutter, aperture, and ISO. And now we can ramp up that ISO, and it doesn't sort of distort like your stereo would until you get a really high volume. So we can go really high. So these are the three things that will most profoundly affect what your images are going to look like. So by simplifying your process, by keeping it in one mode and having full control of what your images are going to look like, every time you take that camera out and start shooting, there's less and less having to remember anything because it becomes intuitive. You know how to do. You've done it so much that it just becomes, the focus is fast with back button, you're in aperture priority, maybe wide open, so on and so forth. So it's just a very fast way to work. Wide open is often my starting point just because when I focus on something, by having things blown out in terms of the foreground or the background, that's often what I want. That's why I invest in those fast lenses, not to use them for a lot of depth of field, but to use them for the beautiful out-of-focus bokeh. So it's often my starting point, but also maybe my ending point as well, staying in aperture priority. So I take that camera out of the bag, see something, focus, shoot, perfect. It's probably what I wanted. Just add a little depth of field, boom. It just becomes very intuitive. ISO, this is an old picture taken with a D300 at 3200 ISO. If you pixel peep, sure, you're going to see some noise. But by the time you print it or post it, chances are it's not going to be there. I wouldn't worry about it. So back button autofocus, I would definitely, just to get you quicker in terms of what you're doing. Here's an example of where the picture is being helped by the illusion of movement, slow shutter speed panning. But otherwise, I'll set up my camera so that I can set a maximum ISO. Maybe I don't want it to go above 3200, but I want a minimum shutter speed of 1/400th of a second. So it thinks like I do. It knows that the highest, best dynamic range is toward the lowest number, which is 100 on this particular camera. So it wants to stay there, but it will go up to 3200 and no higher to give me that 400th of a second. I'd rather have a noisier image that's sharp, that hangs on the wall, than a great dynamic range that gets tossed out into the trash. This is where auto ISO in the field is a very powerful thing when I'm traveling because there's so much going on. I don't want to have to think that much about technical issues. Which camera serves you best? I mean, again, we have to think about it. Sometimes these small mirrorless or the small sensor means that you don't need to bring that 600 millimeter f4 lens. You can use a much smaller one. The Nikon 1V, whatever it was, a 300 was an 800. So there were people that went on safari and took the small package and got pictures they were really happy with. It focused fast. Even though the sensor is small, you can make beautiful, nice prints, make a nice book. That's something to consider. What is your final output? Is bigger better? I mean, I like megapixels for sure. Can you have too many megapixels? I can't. Yeah, maybe I can. But it doesn't really matter because it just matters what your purpose is. So in the book, my friend Ben Long, he took this picture with his fancy Canon camera, and his friend Janine took the same picture, and Ben lamented that he liked her picture better because he just spent $2,000 on this camera. And I asked, what did she use? Well, it was like a Quaker Oats can with a little hole cut out and a piece of film. And she used a pinhole camera, but this is what you're going to get. And as an artist, maybe this is what you want. And it depends on kind of what your vision is. The phone is better than it ever has been. These pictures were all taken with an iPhone. But they don't necessarily look like they were taken with an iPhone. So again, the idea of when you're traveling, having all this choice can be good, but again, in my experience, less is more. And that applies not only compositionally, but also in terms of the stuff that you bring, because it can be an albatross to have a lot of stuff with you. Now, certain tools you need if you're going on safari and so on and so forth. But going out and living with the limitations of one camera, one lens, forces you to find a way to use that to the best of your ability. And that often means stronger images. Having more megapixels means that you can take this picture with my D810 and blow it up to this and still have a very usable picture. So maybe I don't need to bring that long lens because I can use the megapixels as a way. And for me, megapixels is not so much about making giant prints, but it's about possibilities of taking part of the frame and having a usable image. And then when that happens, I make a note, and then in my process, I try and fast track. I don't want to be cropping just a small part. I want to get it in camera. But it's nice to have the flexibility. And when we're traveling, that can be an important thing too. I think having a tripod is really important. Depth of field and sharpness. You guys know where to focus, on your depth of field. So in this scene, if I want to maximize my depth of field, where do I focus? A third of the way in, because depth of field falls 1/3 in front and 2/3 behind. So it may not feel intuitive. You may want to focus sort of on infinity. But sometimes I'll be working for Nikon, and I'm making images that they're going to use as sample images, and they don't want me to go beyond f8. And the reason for that is that even though beyond f8 I'm going to have more in focus, it actually affects the sharpness. I may not see it, but of course they're very particular. They want the sharpest image. So I have to really be sure at f8 that, sometimes I'll even bracket my focus to make sure that I know where 1/3 is. But I'll still shoot f11, f16, f22, because frankly, it doesn't really matter to me, how sharp is sharp enough? How much money is enough? Okay, maybe that's not a good example, but, it depends on the situation. But ideally, you get something called diffraction at very small apertures, and by not using them, that can be something that, and especially if you're on a tripod, you can experiment, right? You're not going anywhere, you're going to do a bracketed series. I would do a bracketed series when traveling on a tripod, even though I'm not an HDR guy. Maybe in 3 years from now I will be, and I'll have the raw materials to put them together as HDRs. That'll be my new thing. Who knows? Selective focus is powerful because what you focus on will be sharp, but even though the stuff that is out of focus is really out of focus, it still reads, yet the viewer goes to where you want them to go to. It's a powerful thing. She's completely out of focus, but you totally get her. And that is a powerful realization, to understand that something could be very, very out of focus, yet still contribute powerfully to the image. But that comes with a little practice and a little volume. So when you have, the closer you are to something, the more you're going to sort of throw out the focus at any aperture, in the background. So sometimes you need to add some depth of field. So when there's time, give yourself some examples, and you're going to learn from that. When you have time to try f4, f8, f11, see what happens. I think the problem with zooms is something that is not really a problem, but it depends where you are on your photographic journey, because having too many choices can be a problem. And I find that some people, when I talk about that, I mean students, will sort of stand there and zoom and think that they're really working the scene, but they're not. I would say if you have a zoom, use it at 28 or 35, and then zoom with your feet and see what things look like, work it. Once you're in position, then you can tweak it in terms of the framing, but don't use it as a substitute for sort of working the scene. And of course, the prime lens advantage is it means you can focus, use selective focus and really kind of blur out beautifully and shoot in very low light at relatively fast shutter speeds without having to ramp up the ISO. So there's an intimacy, again, that you get by using a wide-angle lens, and you can still, yeah, Dance Parade in Chinatown. You can really throw this out of focus really nicely and focus and add impact to the image. But one thing I would suggest to you is, if you have a lens that goes faster than 2.8, 1.8, 1.4, in my experience, I will use it a couple of clicks from wide open. So I will use a 1.4 lens at 1.8, which seems like, well, why don't you just buy a 1.8? You would have saved yourself a lot of money. Well, you're still going to get that same beautiful out-of-focus bokeh that a 1.4 lens gives you, but at 1.8, I'm going to have a sharper image. And if I have a 1.8 lens, I'll use it at 2.2. If I have a 2.8 or smaller, 4, 5, 6, I have no qualms about using it wide open all the way. But that's just one thing that can help. And these articulating screens are really exciting to me because many of the new cameras not only will swivel, but they have a touch screen. So I could sneakily come up and I could sort of go like this and touch your eye, and it will focus on your eye and take the picture. Does anyone have a camera that does that? I know the D500 does it. You've got one. It's pretty exciting for sort of sneaky, stealthy street photographers when you're traveling. And I've heard photographers, I think it was Zach Arias, who was saying that he'll, let's say I want to take a picture of, what's your name? Marjorie. I want to take a picture of Marjorie. So I will go up in live view, and I will pretend to take a picture of the building that Marjorie's at. I'll go like this, and then I'll pretend to look at the picture, but then I'm really taking the picture of Marjorie, and then I'll do that again. So I mean, there are techniques on the street. I don't want to necessarily engage with people sometimes, so I want to shake it off. So if people are coming toward me and I think they're going to talk to me, I will pretend to just keep shooting, or the phone rings and I'll talk, I'll order a pizza, anything to kind of, diffuse the situation. I haven't had negative situations, again, very often. So I'm going to show you a few pictures, again, mostly with prime lenses, and also these were some assignments for Nikon using just little cameras, but it doesn't matter what the camera is. I'm just going to make the most of whatever camera that's there. Thank you very much. When you're traveling, I think you have the ability to rent lenses. But again, I think that's a good way to sort of figure out whether you're going to make the investment, especially if it's an expensive lens. It's probably worthwhile to maybe rent it. experience it, know that, because you're going to commit to it, it's expensive. You don't want to not use it. How many people have rented stuff? A few of you have, yeah. So for traveling, I have a bit of a bag problem. Does anyone else have a bit of a bag problem? Again, this is the David Brommer collection that I'm pointing at. But, we're always looking for the perfect bag, but there is no perfect bag because you need different bags for different situations. So I want to have a day bag, something that I could sleekly, carry with me. This I'll keep in my inside luggage when I'm traveling. But I also want to have a transport bag, which is something on wheels, something that will fit on even a little puddle jumper. This one's become a little bit big, but there are bags out there that are relatively big that won't necessarily fit in the compartment up top, but they'll let you put it under your seat. In the end, you don't want to check that bag, even if they're going to give it to you, because God knows what's going to happen. You need to be able to hit the ground running without your luggage or whatever, your camera stuff, a couple of battery chargers, maybe your tripods in your checked baggage, but you need to not check that bag. And for that reason, I think there's a few airport tips that I'll give you. I'll take along one of these IKEA bags. I once they wouldn't let me get the bag in. And so I said, okay, well, then I'm going to just take all this stuff and I'll put it in here. I'm just not checking it. You've had that happen too.
Vest. Oh, yes.
A vest is good too. Yeah, you could, they don't weigh the passenger, and yet, so you could have a lot of stuff there. Yeah, the vest is good. I mean, it may be a fashion faux pas, but it doesn't matter because you got all your stuff there. Now, I think it's important to have supports, both emotional and physical, when it comes to your travels. And I think that having some sort of a small, having more than one even, but even a small carbon fiber, and there's many of them out there, a lot of good solutions that don't take a lot of space or weight, yet offer you the ability to plant that tripod and get images at low ISO. And even for street photography, I will use that. I will just travel with it, I'll plant it down, and I'm ready, I'm fast, and click. And even though it's a quarter-second exposure of the couple that's kissing, I can sometimes get it. And if they see me, usually, I have my, Jerry Lewis face that just diffuses the situation. I think it's good to also have, tripods that have that little hook, so you can put the camera bag or something heavy on it, because a light tripod becomes a real strong anchor. And I think it's really good to invest in a very good ball head, especially when you're dealing with difficult weather or physical difficult situations. I'm from Canada in the cold. If you don't have a smooth situation when you're on a tripod, it's like 80% harder. Also, we have to be comfortable as photographers or else we're not going to make our best work. So we have to dress for success. We've got to wear the right stuff. If it's raining, we've got to have everything. And, it's a good investment because you don't need more than one. You can have it forever until you lose it. And then there's even these monopods that fold out in a pinch into kind of a tripod or a light stand if you want it. I photographed this guy when I photographed that parade because he had knee pads, and I thought, that's smart, to put on some knee pads. Again, it's not a fashion thing. Bill Cunningham, rest in peace, would not photograph you, but it's practical to have something like that because then you have the ability to kneel down and get the better picture. Geotagging hasn't totally caught on, but it's cool. And I think ultimately our pictures are going to have geotags on them. And when I'm traveling, these little Instax cameras are great because I could offer something really special, especially in third world countries. And I've been to places, and you probably have too, where unlike here, where we have 1 million pictures in our shoebox, they may only have one photograph, one physical photograph, or none. So to give them the gift of an instant photo, as small and nice as they are, when you have a great experience, it doesn't take up a lot of space, not that expensive, and you can still give the physical photograph because they don't have emails. You can't email them a picture.
You can if they work in a hotel.
If they work in a hotel, yeah. But not everyone you meet is going to be working in a hotel, So I just think, for those special situations, it can be a really nice thing. You have to figure out a way to be self-sufficient if you're going on a long trip. You don't want to be dealing with too much dust. It's not hard, and there's a lot of tools nowadays to really clean our sensor, and I think it's a good thing to do. Just a couple of tips for travel from my experience. Not as many as countries as you, but still many countries. and that is I learned from my travels in Africa, take twice as much water as you think you're going to need. And when it comes to the memory cards, I take twice as many as I think I'm going to need. Because you can't always find them. They'll never be as cheap as they are at B&H Photo right in this place. And I think it's really important. I've also learned to pack early on a trip. And I put this picture in, you won't believe this. I took this picture in Nunavut. I had an assignment there, and guess what? I forgot my memory cards. I went to Nunavut without memory cards. Like I had one in the camera, and then I had some people that helped me. It was okay. It worked out okay. I will deny it. Is this, okay, it's live streaming and millions of people are listening. Okay. Didn't really happen? No, it did. I left my memory cards. It worked out. But you know why it happened is because I was in a rush. I was a chicken without a head. And I've learned to really kind of pack early and have a travel checklist so that I'm not going to forget something important. That's at the very least, it's going to be a pain in the butt. At the most, it could, seriously impact negatively the shoot. The other thing too is, I think, take pictures of yourself. Not necessarily the selfie, but look for yourself in reflections and so on. It's nice to have a record of yourself in the place, at least for the introduction in the book or the conclusion in the book. I've got a bunch of bookmarks for travel photography, so I will trade you, if you sign up for my newsletter, and I'll send this path around, I'll send you all these travel bookmarks that I use that have all this great information for when you're traveling. Now, you guys probably have a lot of that stuff. If you don't have global entry, if you happen to be an American citizen, it's a powerful thing. You'll save a lot of time both checking in. They'll often give you the TSC pre-check. You can leave your computer in. You don't have to take your shoes and pants off and all that kind of stuff. Okay, it's a wonderful thing.
Put pants on?
It's good.
And they're not giving any appointments in Manhattan. You have to go out to the airport.
Yeah, I think that's where at JFK they have an office. Unfortunately, they hold all the cards, so if you have to go to the airport, you can plan on making the appointment maybe early, get to the airline early before your flight, or you might have to make a separate schlep to get it done. Passport cards, I'm not going to talk about because I'm not sure the validity of them exactly, but I know that aside from your passport, you can have a passport card that can often be used, at least in Mexico and Canada, but maybe that's changing. I haven't checked most recently. I think it's a good investment to invest in one airline for the main reason of, I don't care about getting upgraded, that would be nice, but I don't want to be in zone 5. I want to board first because I can't afford to have my equipment tagged and checked. So fortunately, I'll always find a way. And if you're not lucky enough to have that, elite status on an airline, if you go up and talk to people beforehand, you can often sort of explain to them the situation. Or if you can purchase a way to get in early, which now all these extra charges, I think it's a good investment for photographers not to be able to lose that. There's a site called Seat Guru that's part of the thing that lets you look at your flight and choose a seat that might be a better seat. Have anyone used this? Yeah, some of you guys do. It's good. It'll show you what to use and what not to use. Having a VPN client, do you guys have one of those? Do you know what that is? It means that you subscribe to this. It's not very expensive. I think it's $30 for 6 months. And when you travel to certain countries, like I know I've been to Dubai, where the internet is somewhat controlled, or China, it allows your computer to fool the local servers into thinking that, well, it actually is using a New York server or a California server. So instead of having the Yahoo in Arab or Chinese, you have your familiar stuff. And you have full access to the internet the way you know it. And it's an easy thing. It's not such a big deal for the United States because there's some countries where you have to register. If you don't register your equipment, when you come back home, they're going to ask you, well, did you buy this from somewhere? And they could take your equipment and you have to prove that you bought it before. Fortunately for us, if you live in the United States, it's probably arguably the cheapest place, although with the dollar, Japan was even cheaper to buy certain things. But you could do this. You can register your equipment so that you have absolutely no problems coming back. You can prove it. Canadians would do it because they would come to B&H, come to New York, come to B&H, come back with the camera. Oh no, I bought this in at Tim Hortons on Yonge and Eglinton or whatever. But anyway, it's just something to know about. There's a great site, and there's a great health clinic here in New York on 6th Avenue that will allow you to figure out what kind of immunizations, if any, that you need. It's in the bookmark, so if you're going to Namibia, you want to know exactly what's involved and so on and so forth. I have when I go on my workshops, they call me the pharmacist because I bring a lot of stuff that you're not going to find. And just as a precaution, I think maybe you guys do too. It's probably a good idea to have that, including toilet paper. Go to Bed Bath & Beyond, they get those little mini rolls. Some days I would pay $100 for a roll of toilet paper. So yeah, you want to make sure that you're prepared, I think is a good idea, for the situation that you're embarking in, depending on where you're going. As far as sites to book your flight, we can talk about that later, but it's a wonderful thing. We can really find some cheap accommodation. We can find everything we need from the comfort of our laptop, which is very exciting. I have some cards up here, though it's not listed up there. You can see that I make these little cards, these moo.com cards, and I might just have my email address. So this is for encounters with people I meet. I might leave the onus on them. Sure, I'll email you a picture. Just email me and remind me what the photo is. And sure, I'm happy to do that because it doesn't. And if I'm a woman, maybe I won't even have my name. I have an email address, because you don't want to give out a lot of information. But then I have my real card, or there that's got more information. You guys are welcome to have it. And you can always email me if you have more questions. Model releases, it's a slippery landscape. It's something that if you want to use your images for commercial purposes, you kind of need a model release. And in my experience, because I sometimes have assignments, using the apps on my iPad makes it kind of a fun thing as you scroll through the legalese that I would never sign in a million years and sign with your finger. You can maybe more easily convince someone to sign something if you want to use images for stock or for commercial purposes. I think getting postcards is a good idea just as a visual way to communicate. Sometimes if you're on your own, I want to go there, you tell the taxi driver. And also, sometimes you'll see something, I want to go there because I want to take pictures there because this is amazing and I need to go there. So sometimes I will do that. Don't edit in the field. Turn that review screen off. But when it comes to editing, so here's my thing. Probably the strongest link in the digital chain is this SD card, XQD card, CF card, CFast card, micro SD card. You could leave it in your jeans, wash it, dry it. It'll still work. Has anyone done that? Besides me. Okay, I've done that. It's not true that if you drop your SD card, you'll knock your pictures out of focus. I don't know who told you that. It's not true. It's not true. It's not going to happen. These things have been found submerged for a year in the salt water, and still the pictures are there. So just some best practices. Always reformat in your camera. Creates a new directory, allows the images to be overwritten. Rotate your cards. You should rotate them. They do wear out, but chances are you will wear out before the card does, because by the time the cards are ready to be changed, the technology has changed. They're faster, sharper, whatever. They're better. A lot of times people are using, if you have a 2-card slot, you can use backup, which is a good idea. But it'll slow down your camera a little. If you're doing action photography, if you're shooting RAW plus JPEG, overflow's the fastest, because when one card populates, it gets to the end, then the other card goes. But using cards as a backup for traveling, and that's what I do. So, for instance, I take extra cards, and part of my process is I will shoot, and then I will take the card out, and then I will download to my SSD drive, because an SSD drive is a little more rugged, and then I'll have another maybe regular drive. So I'll make 2 backups, and then after I've done that, I'll take the card and put it in my holder, but I'm not going to put it back in the camera. I'm going to have my whole shoot from my trip to Cuba in my pocket in case something happens to my computer or my hard drive. Redundant backup. So I have at least 3 versions. I'll have 2 drives and my cards, the raw cards. And I'll have 2 versions. And then when I get back, I have kind of a holding tank. I use LaCie drives. I have a holding tank where I'll sort of take all the stuff off the small drives, put them on, and then they go into my archive, which then will be backed up to another archive off-site at my mother-in-law's house, so that if the house burns down, you have it off-site. My 5-star will be in a cloud somewhere. We'll go outside. I'll show you which cloud. It'll be in the cloud. Because really, in the end, we shoot thousands of frames, but how many images are going to really represent it? You go look at Cartier-Bresson, who shot for 80 years, and when he died, his retrospective archive, I mean, maybe there's 500 images that are the ones that are the keepers, and for us too, it's like that. So the idea of having redundant backup, I think, is a very good idea. So get out of your comfort zone, take some photographic chances. I think you should try some new stuff. Don't be afraid, get out of your comfort zone. I was just going to tell you, since this is a free presentation, now you pay the price by hearing and I don't get paid for this, but so I do workshops, and I have one coming out. This one's actually sold out in Vancouver. We do Havana different times. I've got a great partner. We do an amazing workshop in Havana. And we're going to go to Lisbon in October, and we're going to Japan. And then the last thing I'll tell you is I do courses on lynda.com, and I do this Critique of the Week show, and I also have a course I recommend, which is what is it called? Learning to critique photos, because I think it's important to be able to speak the language of critiquing. It'll help you in articulating and asking questions when you do have a critique. You can get a free trial by putting the lynda.com/trial/Steve Simons. It doesn't even cost you anything. And you can stay on, I think, for a month. Well, I'm here for a while. I know you guys will be shopping, but thank you guys for coming out on July 5th.